My name is Scott Noel, and Phil and I met as freshmen at Washington University 51 years ago. And 51 years ago, that's just appalling. I'm just so honored to be included in this, I guess, retrospective, but also thanks to Stephen Francis and Liz and Martin Geiger, the whole world of Virginia, I think, has gathered to a very great degree to do something for an artist that an artist cannot do for themselves, which is to try to make pull things together to show what has been done over, say, that 50 years, and maybe give us a first sampling or a first accounting of maybe what was at stake in that life's work, what was going on. So I wanted to sort of, from a painter's perspective, give you guys a little bit of what I might call an accounting of what I think is going on in the work that might illuminate, how we assess works of art, how we decide whether a work of art, what its value to us might be. I think I prepared a bunch of written remarks, which I might sort of slog through and beg your patience with. And then I hopefully will kind of go off script a little bit. One of the things I want to do is take a hard look at least one painting. One painting that I hope dramatizes maybe the point I want to make about Phil's work. But what I'm aware of is I'm surrounded by lots of fans and other artists. I mean, artists that, know Phil and known him for a long time and have distinguished careers of their own. So one of the things I also want to hopefully encourage is other voices and other readings of the work, which may be possible at the end of my remarks. I don't know how long this is going to go. It might be over in 15 minutes, and then I'll hand it over to all of Phil's fans to do their own encomia to what he's achieved, if you want to. By the way, that gives you I'm also giving you a license to shout me down if what I say about the work seems so off point and unjust that you just cannot bear it. So let me do a little bit of my boilerplate, and then I'll see. Actually, I'm going to read you something first, and hopefully this will make some sense, or maybe it'll set the stage. I felt as if I had been plunged into a sea of wine of thought and must drink to drowning. But the first distinct impression which fixed itself on one was that of the entire superiority of painting to literature as a test, expression, and record of human intellect, and of the enormously greater quantity of intellect which might be forced into a picture and read there, compared with what might be expressed in words. I felt this strongly as I stood before the Paul Veronese. I felt assured that more of man, more of awful and inconceivable intellect went into the making of that picture than of 1,000 poems. What an arrogant thing to say. But I'm on his side. I think paintings are just loaded with thought and intelligence that masquerades as something kind of momentary and immediate in our apprehension of a picture. But the thing is, when a picture is good, and Phil's pictures are manifestly of the highest order, I just watched you guys communing with them before the show. You keep visiting them. You keep looking at them. What are you finding there? I mean, it's just, grease on a board, and you're looking at them like there's some kind of grail or something. But I don't think you're wrong. But I also think that it's a real communal effort to unpack what's in those paintings. like why we keep coming back to them in our nourished life. Okay. By the way, does anybody want to know who wrote that little defensive painting? That was John Ruskin, a great British critic and great lover of Turner. Phil and I met as freshmen at Washington University in the fall of 1974. 50 years ago, as sophomores, we embarked on a figure drawing class that was transformative for us both. Perhaps the central outcome of Barry Schachman's figure structure class was to persuade the susceptible that representation, the effort to make an understanding of the visible, I just misread it. The effort to make an understanding visible was emotional. For a visual artist, the center of this emotional enterprise might be the experience of seeing or light, or more abstractly, space. So what I'm saying there is surely part of the reason that we're so struck and fascinated by Phil's work is some emotional appeal that they make. They get to us in some way. Okay. A year before our immersion in Schachman's figure structure psychodrama, and I'll tell you a little bit about it, we had taken an art history class taught by Norris K. Smith. Smith insisted art making entailed a kind of ethics, essentially expressed in the metaphor of perspective and standpoint. You're looking at Phil's paintings, they look like exemplars of a kind of rational employment of perspective, the rules of optics, how we see. Are you guys mostly persuaded that, yeah, that's what the world looks like?
No.
You fell for it. You took the bait, because that ain't the world. That's maybe what we hope it was, but that ain't what it is. One of Smith, our art history teacher's set piece talks aligned Renaissance perspective with Luther's declaration, "Here I stand." You guys know the great presentation that Luther makes at the Council of Worms, where he, basically signs his own death warrant. It says, "My feeling about human access to the divine is where I stand." Okay, so that was our bloody, freshman art history teacher invoking Luther and the Bible as part of an artist's mission. Geez, I wasn't ready for that. Phil was, though. It interests me a lot that Stephen Coates, our great impresario, has intuitively gathered these themes: feeling, perception, standpoint, and the beauty of being in the world, to his effort to celebrate Phil's achievement. This retrospective and many Allied events this past year invoked the school of beauty and goodness. Did I get it right?
You got it.
Beauty and goodness. Phil and I almost immediately became comrades and have remained so to this day. But here's the funny thing. We met when we were 19. We never played sports together, went out drinking, double dated, or shared much of any social life to this day. Our bond was the studio, its ideas, rigors, and joys. We have also been competitors, I think, although early on our precise obsessions began to diverge. Smith, the art historian, the ethicist, and Schachman, our figure drawing teacher, the sensual evangelist, set us both a similar paradoxical challenge. There were the demands of the empirically true, all the ways that we think these pictures are true, honoring actuality, how the world appeared, and the stickier, messier needs of the temperament, what one needed to see And I think that's one of the things we have to kind of be aware of, and I think Phil's work is an exemplary of it. You are, at the level of feeling, you're confronting not just the world, but a certain hope about the world, which is complex and layered and dense with nuances of feeling. Does that make any sense? A painter's retrospective is a unique way to assay a creative life. Arranged chronologically or thematically, each picture is like a furnished room, built to answer the painter's needs at a moment in time. Now we get to walk through the adjoining rooms of a working life. As a great poet of interior space, I'm very interested to consider the house the pictures metaphorically comprise. It's kind of no other form of art actually creates such a kind of literal sense of moving through space as, the idea of seeing an artist's picture one after another. It's almost like you're walking through moments in a life that really lead you to what that artist seemed to care about at that time. And by the way, I think all of you who are artists, and I think Phil would roll his eyes at this, remember that every moment you paint, you have no idea what that moment of painting has to do with the one that came before it, or the one that came after it. Each moment of painting is a world entire. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And strange, exotic, and pathetic all at the same time. Because only people that need painting make them and look at them. All of you guys have serious problems. No, I'm serious. And I'm here to help. All right, now I'm going to read you something else that I think is entertaining, and I hope I don't butcher it. But I shan't tell you who wrote it for a long time, because that might prejudice your response. What one should learn from artists? That's the heading. What one should learn from artists, as if you could learn anything. How can we make things beautiful, attractive, and desirable for us when they are not? And I rather think that in themselves they never are. Here we could learn something from physicians. I'm here to help. When, for example, they dilute what is bitter or add wine and sugar to a mixture. But even more from artists who are really continually trying to bring off such inventions and feats, that is, to make the world beautiful, when it isn't. Moving away from things until there is a good deal that one no longer sees. And here there is much that our eye has to add if we are still to see them at all. Or seeing things around a corner and as cut out and framed. Or to place them so that they partially conceal each other and grant us only glimpses of architectural perspectives. Or looking at them through tinted glass or in the light of the sunset, or giving them a surface and a skin that is not fully transparent. All this we should learn from artists, while being wiser than they are in other matters. For with them, this subtle power usually comes to an end where art ends and life begins. But we want to be the poets of our life, first of all, in the smallest, most everyday matters. Isn't that beautiful? Mm-hmm. And by the way, I found it, and I thought, especially when the writer is describing, artists' tricks, framing, obscuring or layering, creating things that are not fully transparent, glimpses, cutting things out. There you go. And I thought maybe, okay, Let me give you something else. Now, there's a perspective. And let me just do something now. I'm not going to tell you. Because if I tell you, I will dismiss you. Does anybody have a guess who wrote that?
Was it a painter?
No. It's actually somebody with really bad eyes. Somebody
Not
who couldn't
color.
see well. Because the writer that I just read to you emphasizes that one of the things that artists do is trick you into thinking you're seeing more than you're seeing. And here's a great example. Somebody here asked me, is that me? Because that rather bird-like broken down person sort of looks like since it's a great painting, fine. So I'll suspend my vanity. But this painting is actually kind of interesting in a lot of ways. But I'll ask you to look at it like a painter first, and maybe for all time. First of all, squint your eyes at it for a second and ask yourself how many colors you operatively see in the painting. And I would say the painting essentially boils down to that color against that color. And one of the things that's kind of striking, even though I'm looking at a man reading a newspaper, an exasperated female presiding over his obliviousness, and a strange claustrophobic suburban array ringing that sunlit room. If you look at any place in particular, the guy's shirt, or the house across the way, or the trees before that house, or the woman's face, the more you look at the place, the less you see. That the entire meaning of the painting hinges on what you might call the interaction of the stuff that's there. And there's a lot of stuff there, at least 3 or 4 houses, walls, floor, table, 2 people, recognizably attired in summer. You almost write a story for this. Like, I don't think I'm in Virginia, I think I'm in San Diego or something like that. I'm in a bungalow somewhere, and it's gotten overbuilt, but right over that horizon is the beach. Does that make sense? I mean, you supply your own story. That's exactly what the painter hopes you'll do. That's mine, But what is it that engenders such a rich kind of psychological engagement with the picture? Well, is it the brilliance of the artist in creating these types? Is it the very, very spectacular precision of the light, which you just absolutely recognize? Don't you recognize that light? I've been in that light. And yet, if I really try to take it apart, I keep being led to something that feels alarmingly distilled or condensed, like a metaphor. Metaphor is an almost aphoristic kind of analogy between 2 dissimilar things where they actually illuminate each other. And I might ask yourself, do paintings ever partake of metaphor? Because, our first writer, Ruskin, said, painting's a different thing from writing and metaphor. So let me ask you, you don't speak because I don't want to hear your voices, but ask yourself in yourselves, if you know what a metaphor is, if you've ever experienced metaphor in writing, do paintings themselves have metaphorical dimensions? Do we think of paintings as operating with metaphors? I kind of think Phil's work persuades me that they do. But what are the metaphorical terms of the painting? Again, Phil would just be horrified. In fact, he's the sweetest, most, I guess self-controlled person I've met. But at this point, he might produce a gun and start firing. Because he just doesn't want to do it. Look at the paintings. But as I say, I keep looking at how the incredible fabric of psychological illusion in the painting comes down to the light, and the light comes down to this core, that silvery blue that has an upper register in that gold, and that strange ochre gray, which has blue and green dimensions to it. But if you squint your eyes at the painting, it cuts out into that, and that, which by the way comes indoors with that sunlight. And all of this is welded together. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. That if you were bold enough, which very few painters are, this painting could be started and nearly finished with just those two mixtures, and you could paint the entirety of the interior just that color, and the entirety of the landscape just that color, and that would dissolve every bit of interior detail and every bit of exterior detail into just those two colors. And the question is, if you're a painter, would you have anything? Would that be so reductive that nothing would happen? Well, Phil and I, both in our lives, under the pressure of teaching, found ourselves having to try things like that. And I'll just bet you, if this painting was solarized and bleached down to just those two colors, you'd still see two figures in a room on a sunny day. Does that make any sense to you? Okay. If that's true of this painting, which I don't even think is the most memorable painting in the show, except for my presence. I think if you now consult all the paintings in the show with squinted eyes, which I earned the hard way with the terrible fissures that surround my eyes. Otherwise, a fairly boyish glow. If you look at all of Phil's paintings through that lens of distillation of a lot of visual information into what I might call fields of color light that meet, you'll get quite far at understanding the stagecraft of the pictures. Would you follow me there? Did you buy that? Which sounds a little bit off-putting because there are so many other ways to value Phil's pictures. That seems like an incredibly reductive way to value them. But let me just ask you, when we value works of art as somehow important to us, in a strange way, we all work our way through what I would call a ladder of appreciation. So I'm going to bet, like you guys, my ladder of appreciation might begin with that woman's face, or that blueberry tart, or that teapot. Well, and that ladder of appreciation might broaden to the gesture of that guy, somewhat predator-like, being repelled by that young girl's resistance. And then I might find myself just adoring the way, I think that might be Martin, captured between the pincers of that sunlight moving across the floor. And then I might find myself, what if the key to Phil's paintings were those paintings on the wall? What if that ability to digest physical complexity is exactly what I might call a great poet's little clue, maybe what you ought to look at. Now, okay, so in that ladder of appreciation, I've moved from things to light, to psychological relations. Where else? I'm going to say every one of you has an inner voice that's saying, what about that? Every person in Phil's paintings seems to be a recognizable and specific human being. What about that? You're right. I bet you if you look at all these paintings together, you also might say, Scott, are you ever going to talk about the fact that these recognizable interiors all represent absolutely distinct envelopes of light? Try to find a painting in the entire show where the exact texture and color of the light actually repeats. What about that? That almost amounts to what I would call a moral proposition. What if you were to make paintings that were so sensitive to the texture of lived experience that they demanded that you understand that every moment of lived experience is inimitable? One of this time, just this once, and that's it. How would you live if you actually believed that? And you're looking at paintings that seem to say it. They say it in what I would call, I'm going to now have to resort to metaphor. They turn things like color and light into a kind of metaphorical proposition about particularity. Does that make any sense? By the way, again, I am so used to being disagreed with and shouted down. I can cope if I say really unbearable. All right. Now I just gave you what sounds like an art professor's, which I am, kind of syllogism of radical simplification. I've said that the great kind of inaugural achievement of the work is its ability to digest great visual complexity into fields of nameable color light. That's probably my argument. You guys can all go. Okay, now here's a mutual friend, painter who's in the catalog I've offered to you, named Frank Galuska, who we all go way, way back. Although I don't think Phil ever knew Frank quite as well as maybe we do, my friend Jeff Carr and I. Here's something that Frank wrote about Phil's work. A household interior of thresholds, hallways, intersecting rooms, large spaces high on light that has become a theater of relationships. Families and extended families as brother and sister visit or friends. It is the supremacy of the young family, the family finding itself in the full of life, in the course of the robust current of well-being, that unlike the novel, the painting and the painting's narrative does just fine without trouble or stress. Here there is not added sweetness, no proclamation. The goodness and warmth and life is not self-conscious, and clearly we are moving through life. Time finally appearing is admittedly fleeting in its flight captured. Its instants cannot be comprehended and structured. They are fragmentary, moments only, not narratives with beginnings and ends. These paintings are not about analysis, chariots of the life, evidence of the wisdom of the song that sings, how little it matters, how little we know. The impossibility of comprehensive knowledge is not only forgiven, it is a liberating pleasure, as in its forgiveness we are free to be alive in whatever arriving and vanishing present the painter, whatever arriving and vanishing present the painter awards us. That's how the paintings feel. That is how they feel. They don't at all feel like the set of propositions I just gave you. They immediately deliver you to this shared experience of life, which, by the way, paradoxically is deeply surprising. One of the ways I judge the power of a work of art is the sense of recognition I have before that work is as if, yes, of course, this is exactly right, and yet I never thought of it. Does that make sense? That you're looking at something that seems so urgent, so true, so fresh, and yet it had never occurred to you in that way. So, one of the things I think my friend Frank Galuska is emphasizing is what I would call the narrative impact of the work, the way it makes you feel, and the funny way in which we want to read stories into the pictures, but I'm not sure the stories and the pictures are the point. They might be for some viewers. I mean, for some viewers, it might be incredibly important to unpack the psychology of these figures' relationship. And those are on offer in the painting. And I think Phil is very much in charge of that. He knows what he's doing when he puts, these old guys in rooms with young women. And, he knows what he's doing. I think they're a kind of apology in a strange way, for a misspent life. At least mine. But there's something else happening, which is like something about the profound power in each moment of seeing in the paintings, which amounts to a world where everything in the painting is creating that effect. And as I said, in this painting, you realize when you try to do what we all try to do, go to the part, go to the figure, go to the thing, locate the meaning there, the paintings resist you. They won't let you do that. They won't let you say, oh, this is the script that makes me understand this figure and this figure. Basically, they won't let you ever privilege the thing you want to privilege, which is the figure or the object, over the wall or the floor. I might even say, in Phil's pictures, he does something deeply humiliating. Walls and floors, skies and clouds are as animate and full of life, and maybe sometimes more so than the figures. I'm not sure any of the figures would have anything like their meaning for us if not for the incredible, I don't know, dignity that Phil gives every piece of the painting. Would you go with me there? Would you accept that? So maybe, remember I said at the very beginning, we had these two great teachers, which I'm not going to make any claims for what they meant to Phil. I know what they meant to me. And one of the things those two great teachers suggested was that in art, there was a part of art that's intensely idealistic. At the very least, as an artist, you hope that you're going to offer something that is true, that is honest, that somehow makes the world more shareable and more worth sharing with others. Is that fair enough? God, that's a heavy mission. Then there's this other thing, that once you become a practitioner, pretty much of anything, I don't think it's just true of art, but art is an intense laboratory for this. You realize the only way you can proceed as an artist is not out of ethical compunction. You can't keep going as an artist trying to do the right thing, because you don't even know what the right thing is. You can only proceed insofar as you listen to the whisperings of something inside you that is very complex. The things that you love, and some of the things you love are kind of hard to cop to. Not necessarily evil or dark, but mortifying. You ever do that little, little check on your youth and think about all the stuff you loved that just embarrassed the hell out of you and cared about, whatever it was? I'm not shy. I was shaped by, Warner Brothers cartoons and Marvel comics and, bad rock and roll, and, just terrible stuff, and yet those were real loves. They were real loves. Those are things that I cared about. And those were a door that I had to go through to find other things. And I think one of the things that is fascinating when I look at an artist like Phil is, if you really consult the pictures carefully, they're full of banalities. You know what I mean by banalities? That have been transfigured as if, wait, this is worth your love. Even insofar as it's banal. Does that make any sense? Okay. So anyway, going back to that, whatever our inaugural mission was as young people 50 years ago, there's first of all that ethical thing that I want to be worthy of Michelangelo or Matisse or Rembrandt. I want to enter that legion of benefactors of mankind if they are that. And that seems like a high moral calling, doesn't it? That seems like beauty and goodness. By the way, beauty and goodness are moral categories. They are not, self-gratifying. They are a devotion. Yeah? But then there's this other thing. You love what you love. You love what you love. And I'm only going to be able to keep going insofar as I am answerable to that. Otherwise, I turn into a rhetorician or a stockbroker. I become something beholden to something that is not me any longer. Does that make sense? So I think one of the things that's also deeply, deeply invigorating and challenging about Phil's work is you live in a kind of dialectic between what I would call the rhetorical, somebody speaking to you in a very grand way about important things, but you also live in the grip of the sensual, because I'm not going to care about it unless I want to eat those paintings. And by the way, Phil's paintings provoke my oral appetite. They're juicy, they're mouthwatering, they're fabulous, aren't they? But they're also stoic and reticent and profoundly economical in certain ways. They say what they have to say, and they get out of it. But they say it in a very, very juicy way that seems to continually invent itself. And by the way, great props and respect towards Liz and the exhibition, because we're here in what I would call the apotheosis of Phil's career. These are the paintings that made Phil famous, insofar as he is as a painter. But spend some time in the first room where Phil is becoming Phil. The things he's trying, in his late 20s through his early 30s, all of the stuff that's happening, all the energies that he's admitting to the work. And some of those are about, a lot of them are about seeing. A lot of them are about taking on artists that he admired. I think one of the really touching things that occurred throughout my conversations with Phil in the last couple of years since his illness was every now and then Phil, who again is a stoic to the nth degree, if you know what a stoic is, profoundly accepting of what is and deeply concerned to manage with what is within himself, what he can control, knowing that most of the stuff we can't control, right? That's what a stoic is. But when you're looking at Phil's self-formation, you see, well, I was going to say that one of the things Phil allowed in recent months, actually, and he said this before over the years, is he'd say, I so regret that I had to reinvent the wheel, that I didn't have teachers or a painting culture that truly supported or was aligned with what I wanted to do as a painter. You've heard him say things like that. Basically saying, my God, if I had had a great mentor or master to sort of just save me some time. Because everything that these paintings achieve cost 25 years of experiment and Phil hits for a very high batting average. Like his bad day is better than almost everybody's best day, everybody's best day. But he was self-critical, he is self-critical enough to sort of say, God, somebody could have saved me some time. Is that a fair thing? We all feel that. But I'm shallower. And I would just say, in a gentle way, doesn't work that way. However much you think you belong to a painting culture, you're going to have to figure it out all for yourself from the very bottom up. You're going to have to do it again. You're going to have, nobody, our great teacher Schockman could not tell you enough about figure drawing where you were exempt from having to do it. In fact, I remember how much Phil resisted Schockman. You said, I'm not going to do what this guy did, all the while knowing he was a great teacher, and I would.
You got a C in that class. That was the only C you ever got. Was in that figure drawing class.
What was that?
Phil got a C in that class.
Yeah, that's a source of enduring pride. I think that's the only time I ever beat Phil because I'm shocked. Bitch. I drank the Kool-Aid. But Phil, to his infinite, credit, wouldn't take it. And here's this guy telling me, I want an existing painting culture to save me time. And yet he would take nothing on faith. And by the way, if you want a working definition for life in art, and an artist in particular, an artist is a person who takes nothing for granted. Nothing for granted. So I would even say, if there truly is an ethical or moral dimension to Phil's work, even that is so damn eccentric, I don't think any of you get to use it. It is inherent in the work. It's not a recommendation of how you must be, or how you must think, or how you must see. And by the way, I was asking my great friend John Lee, here from William and Mary, when you actually think about art, one of the ways we love to consider art is, as a lineage of influences. This person happened, Giotto influenced Masaccio, and Masaccio influenced, that kind of thing, right? Genealogies, right? And one of the things that's really daunting at this stage of artistic production is recognizing that you as a painter, however hard you work, however authentically you pursue your work, are 99.999% fated to sink into the muck after your time is done. Because your work just isn't going to be able to distinguish itself from what has come before, and more importantly, what will come after. And one of the most corrosive ways of appraising artistic achievement is to say, have you made something as an artist that is inimitable? That is, it cannot be imitated. And I thought a lot about, Phil's work in the present moment. And I was thinking, is there anybody out there, young painters, peers, contemporaries, who look anything like Phil's paintings? And really, I can't think of it. And Phil's been going for a long time. And he's taught legions of people brilliantly and encouragingly. Nobody looks like Phil. Nobody can do what he did. But it's not just what he could do. Nobody asks of their paintings what he asks. They'll ask other things. But the point is, most of us, myself included, in the arc of our life's work, wind up asking things that are pretty aligned with what's around us. We join a team. We're in a tribe. But if you want to be great, you have to refuse that. And you have to take steps to inoculate your own work against anybody else's heedless appropriation. And good luck trying to do this. It looks so self-effacing and lyrical and beautiful, and it is. But the rigors that Phil undertook to do that, by the way, that first room gives you a little bit of idea of what he put himself through. If you go from that Colorado basketball court to the backyards in Charlottesville, the parking garages, those could have been a career. Those are incredible paintings. And they were just experiments. Not just, I love those paintings. In fact, I love the anarchy of that first room in a certain way. I think it's exemplary. But anyway, all right. Let me go a little bit further with the script. By the way, are you guys doing okay? Oh, I'm getting near the end here. I have gone too long. All right, back on script now. In the Florida image culture we inhabit, it's important to remember paintings are not just refractions of visual experience, but rather constructions. Built things emerging from a physical matrix to become illusions of space and light. Philip Geiger is a master of this constructive alchemy. And with his retrospective, we get to speculate on the themes and energies, drives and longing, that's the messy stuff, that furnish this succession of rooms, which together make an imaginative world. Because the light, the space, the people in the painting seem so true, and an inaugural question might be, is Geiger simply offering a polished mirror to our experience and delivering a reflection of the real world, if there is such a thing in art? Here, now I'm going to go back to that reading I gave you a few minutes ago. Remember, in a strange way, the reading that I gave you that said, for with them, this subtle power usually comes to an end where art ends and life begins. But we want to be the poets of our life. First of all, in the smallest and most everyday matters. Do any of you guys know who wrote that passage? The thing I read to you a few minutes ago? It's Friedrich Nietzsche. That's Friedrich Nietzsche. That's number 299 in Die Fröhliche Wissenschaft, the gay science, written in 1882. So one of the things that Nietzsche is saying is, hey, artists are not giving you the real world. They're giving you a world that has been transformed so that they can bear it. I don't know that Phil would cop to that. But one time he did assent to that piece of writing where he said, I was not sure that invoking the idea of longing was a fair way of talking about his work. He said, yes, very much. The paintings are a reflection of a longing, of a hope for the way the world would be rather than the way it is. So, if I can, so basically right now I'm backtracking to put in a little neater terms what we just did experimentally looking at the paintings. Okay, let me see if I can bring it home a little bit. Well, typical of me, I gave you guys a very, very poetic title for this talk. Any of you guys know what it was? I said, The Light Inside a Shadow. And I haven't said a word about it. I have no political hopes. My reading of Phil's work owes something to a tribute from another of his admirers, Peter Van Dyke, one of the people that Stephen also represents. And if there is anybody out there in contemporary painting that I think gets close to Phil's work in the sense of being a truly having the same fellow feeling, it might be Peter. It might be. With no disrespect to him or to Phil. They're not at all alike, but they map against each other in certain ways. Peter once told me, because I tried to get Peter to write about Phil, and he's not comfortable with writing. But Peter once told me he'd like to live inside one of Phil's shadows, or something to that effect. Peter's very considerable achievement is testimony to this feeling about the emotion latent in a shadow, or I should say, a field of shadow. I'd like to suggest that at least for me, the feeling awakened by Phil's fields of light and shadow helped to deliver me to Galuska summation. So basically, in a very, very tortured way, I'm saying the armature that underlies all the various ways we can admire the work has to do with this feeling about meetings of light and shadow in Phil's work. And by the way, is there anything in Phil's work you can properly call a shadow? Does that make sense? What do we think a shadow is? A shadow is the absence of light. Yeah? No? Can you find any place in Phil's work that has an absence of light? Especially when you're looking at these shadowy rooms that are so suffused with what? Reflected light. It's all light, all the way down. So here's Frank Galuska's summation in his piece of writing. He says, every trace of life is holographic. For you physicists out there, do you know what a holograph is? It's a slice of shimmering light that has an image embedded in that shimmering field of light. Every trace of life is holographic. The all in everything, every chuckle, glance, and gesture, every choice, never chaos but flow, never digital but analog. The sympathetic look of the artist is included. It is a starker version, more American in its culturally sparse setting, but fresh, forever new, and as deeply true as any other embodiment of the joy of life in art. The key there is the joy of life in art is not exactly the same as the joy of life. It has to be transformed in some way. I'll give you an example. One of the things that happened in the development of the show is a few months ago when we visited, you had some damaged paintings that Phil could no longer fix. And Liz, heroic figure that she is, and great at deputizing, helpless hands, said, "Now, can you fix these paintings?" I said, egomaniac that I am, sure. And you set me up on your porch with two great paintings, which are in the show, and I defy you to find out the ones. But these great paintings, and he said, "Here's Phil's palette." So I'm out on the porch, and it's cold. You did this to me, and you give me a paper palette. Here's Phil's palette. And for those of you who are painters, prepare to be horrified. The palette was titanium white, very vulgar white, raw umber, ultramarine blue, cadmium yellow light, cadmium red medium, cadmium orange, cadmium green. Okay, when do we get to the chromatic neutrals? No, that's it. What? What? Well, make them. You try to make them to get these colors. And I remember, I'm on this paper palette, and then you give me a little sable brush, and I try to paint it like Scott would do it. And Scott would say, "All right, I'm going to mix up these colors, and I'm just going to, in a nice big juicy mixture, hit that tone." And it just fell out of the painting. It was so off. It was just not even close. And so I had to sort of say, "I don't know
how he did this, excuse my language. I didn't know how he did this. And so I start taking strands of all these colors and making this stuff that looks like a rancid stew, brown and goo. And finally, one of the most wretched browns I've ever mixed was exactly the tone. And it told me something really profound, which I always knew about Phil's paintings, which these are also a lot about how the truth that art can disclose, maybe the truth of all lived experience, can only be known in a very sort of narrow bandwidth. It almost the poetry of the painting depends on some of their extreme constrictions of the available evidence. Does that make any sense? So anyway, so I have this chastening but finally deeply fulfilling experience of trying to fix the paintings. Now I'm going to rehearse something that I've said, but it'll help me bring this to a close because it's 2:00. Starting out, we might have been alarmed to realize our well-intentioned teachers had little connection to the painting interests Phil and I would share. Phil has expressed frustration with the painting culture that formed him. There was a sense that in an earlier time, perhaps 19th century Paris or 17th century Amsterdam, there was a more sympathetic consensus about painting, offering practitioners a shared language. No such luck. At first, it seemed we had to reinvent the wheel of a millennia's-long consciousness. We discovered exemplary figures: Edwin Dickinson, Lucian Freud, Balthus, George Nick, who just passed away, Leonard Anderson, who passed away 10 years ago right now, William Bailey, passed away about 4 years ago, 5, Lopez Garcia, still out there on the Plaza de la Sol painting in crowds of American tourists, Rackshaw Downs, artists who dotted the landscape like evangelists on the frontiers of a collapsed imperium. Because that's what it feels like to be an artist sometimes. You remember there was an empire, but it's gone. And all there is a Latin liturgy and a set of historians telling you about it. Phil now has something like the prestige for younger painters Dickinson, Downs, and Lopez had for us. High praise. This came clear for me talking with Peter Van Dyke. Peter immediately recognized a kindred energy in Phil's light, a light that structures space more than it reveals objects. Big difference for a painter. But this feeling is so specific to Phil, it rearranges lineages, perhaps making Phil closer to Bonnard than Vermeer. Phil's self-chosen family would probably begin with Vermeer, and it's just intuition. But he loves Bonnard too, and Matisse, and I think his achievement is that it can never be reduced to a sort of Baroque or Renaissance lineage of optical naturalism. It's deeply infused with everything that came after, all of the highs and lows of modernism, and all of the ironies of modernism that make these pictures so psychologically complex. What has always impressed me about Phil's pictures is the characterization of an experience of seeing. To echo Galuska, these paintings are not about analysis, but experience, the experience of life. In literature, experience is made imaginatively concrete through metaphor, the misapplication of descriptions of unrelated phenomena. Galuska once offered the term, it's our friend Galuska, once offered the term isophore as a painted equivalent for metaphor. Remember I asked you an hour ago, is a metaphorical mechanics that we're operating in painting?
Galuska says, well, not like a verbal metaphor, but what's an isophore, for God's sakes? One of the reliable pleasures of Phil's pictures is the surprise of their painted notation. Viewers are almost involuntarily prompted to analogies the painted surface, between the painted surface and a tapestry. The pictures are a tapestry, a mosaic, or even tectonic plates of light and shadow. So basically what I'm saying is I'm moving from the techne of fields of light to how the paintings are painted. So that's one of the pleasures for us painters and civilians alike. You come up and there's a weird magical disconnect between the illusion and the way they're made. Does that make sense? It's really surprising the way the paint lives in the pictures. So to me, those are what Galuska calls an isophore. That is saying an experience of light can be made into a tapestry or a mosaic, a piece of stained glass, a tectonic plate of light and shadow. And you look at the palette knife energy of some passages in painting, and they're the opposite of transparent. They're just these dense pieces of paint. Almost finished. The pictures are like game boards, rhythmically arranged accents and contrasts. The mathematically inclined might recognize a fractal where the profile of a tree or a cloud is reiterated in the change of color moving across a wall, which is to say, everything mirrors and echoes everything else. By the way, that ain't nature unless you're a saint. But for a painter, it is. One way of measuring the power of Phil's work is the degree to which the light inside a shadow helps to frame the great variety sampled in the Gathering exhibition, Steve's parallel exhibitions, which we'll visit later today if we're still standing. Perhaps truth and beauty are not an objective final destination, just as there is no useful absolute binary between light and shadow. Rather, everything is illuminated, but the beauty of the illumination is only felt within a set of limits like the boundary between two fields of light. That's my case for Phil's painting. And now I would like to close with an artist's prayer, which, excuse me, this is one of the most beautiful things. But you may not understand how it relates to Phil, so you have to take it in faith. It's a poem about a work of art. So imagine this is a poem directed at Phil's paintings. We cannot know his legendary head. With his eyes like ripening fruit, and yet his torso is still suffused with brilliance from inside, like a lamp, in which his gaze, now turned to low, gleams in all its power. Otherwise, the curved breast could not dazzle you so, nor could a smile run through the placid hips and thighs to that dark center where procreation flared. Otherwise, this stone would seem defaced beneath the translucent cascade of the shoulders, and would not glisten like a wild beast's fur, would not, from all the borders of itself, burst like a star. For here there is no place that does not see you. You must change your life. And that is my final question to you. We're looking at the art. Does a work of art see you and judge you? That's it.